given the topic of this week's episode, I wanted to play another song from the band Jay Poisön and the Bat People. This song is called The Gothfather, and it's from their album Planet of the Bat People. You can find them over on Bandcamp at jaypoisonandthebatpeople.bandcamp.com or Instagram. However you track them down, let them know that you heard about them here on The Bride of Monster Kid Radio, the podcast devoted to the classic and sometimes not so classic genre cinema of yesteryear. My name's Derek M. Cook. I'm the writer, host, and producer of the show. Welcome to the show. Welcome to episode 9 of the podcast. And yeah, we're doing some more vampire talk here. This week we are taking a look at a movie from 1979 called Nosferatu the Vampyre. I think this is the first time we've really talked about Klaus Kinski or Werner Herzog here on the show. I'm excited to get into the conversation with you because it's a good conversation with my wife, Beth. She and I sat down and watched the movie the other day, and we got into it. There are going to be some spoilers, but the count will warn you about those spoilers before we get into the main conversation. And speaking of Nosferatu, last week I said I had some voicemails from some Monster Kid Radio Irregulars that I was going to include in the episode, but when I did the master edit, those voicemails fell off. So I'm going to play those for you right now, just as a heads up. They do kind of spoil some things about the 2024 Nosferatu. You've been warned.
Hello, Derek and the Monster Kids. This is Carl Jeff calling from the Joy Cinema in Daggett, Oregon. Okay, I'm going to stop with that now, because that's just ridiculous. I just finished seeing the new version of Nosferatu, and it was okay. It was good. It was not great. Visually, and I've heard this before, visually it's stunning. I could certainly done with a lot less gore, but I feel that way a lot of R-rated modern movies. But otherwise, visually, very beautiful, very arresting. The story, well, it's Dracula. I think probably anyone listening to this show knows that the Nosferatu movie from 1929, it's the novel Dracula with the names changed to avoid paying royalties. The only reason I can imagine doing that in 2024 was that there's a certain expectation when you put the name Dracula in a movie, and maybe they wanted to avoid that. If they, the idea being, if it's called something other than Dracula, it might draw more people in who don't know that Nosferatu is based on Dracula. The only thing really added to the story was the psychic powers of Ellen? I have a hard time remembering the names of the characters in this version because I just think of them as the Dracula version. So, Mina. And having some kind of psychic history with Count Orlok. I didn't really need that. I don't think it added much. Everyone does a fine job acting. Willem Dafoe as the Van Helsing-ish character. Maybe this is just me, and he wasn't certainly playing it to comedic effect, but he sounded an awful lot like Mel Brooks, who rather famously or infamously has played Van Helsing. And just something about his voice sounded an awful lot like Mel Brooks, which I found humorous. I'm sure that was not intentional. Is it worth seeing in the theater? Maybe. It is beautiful. Am I ever going to watch it again? Probably not. There are so many better versions of Dracula, including the silent Nosferatu. So, glad I saw it. Don't need to see it again. Should you see it? Up to you.
Hi, Derek and Beth. It's Kevin Flick calling to you from the northern Shenandoah Valley in Virginia, where I just watched Nosferatu this afternoon at our local Alamo Draft House Cinema. And I can say that I thought it was a beautiful film. I thought it was wonderful, and I enjoyed it immensely. If you know the silent film, you'll recognize a lot of scenes that are basically the same scene, just shot slightly differently. I thought it captured the feel of the original film very well, and basically expanded upon a lot of the things that were suggested or hinted at in the silent film. With a silent film, of course, so there's not as much dialogue, not as much information, perhaps. It gives you a space to fill in some ideas or some gaps or some plot lines and things like that. I thought there were several scenes that just made me want to... I wish they could have stopped the film and just looked at the scene. It was so beautiful. I would say to anyone going to see it, it helps if you like silent movies. It's obviously not a silent movie, but the pacing is very slow. The pacing reminded me of a lot of the German expressionist silent films that I really love, and I know drives some people crazy because they move at a very slow pace. There's certainly scenes that seem kind of frenetic and chaotic in a dreamlike way, but I thought those were all really well done. Overall, I thought it was a superb film, and certainly not for everybody, because it is, as I mentioned, rather a slow-moving film. It's very dreamlike, and so it might appear disjointed, and the plot might seem a little bit disconnected in places, but overall, if you know the film well, then you have no problem following what's going on in it. And I just thought the acting was quite well done, and the cinematography is gorgeous, well worth seeing. So that's my take on the latest Nosferatu.
Hey, Derek and Beth, here's some more thoughts on Nosferatu, since it sounds like you're going to talk about at least the theme of Nosferatu on a further show, if not the new movie again. Couple things. You mentioned, I believe in your review, that you thought there were some scenes that could have been trimmed. Yes, I think that's always the case in films, although in this movie, I thought that the overall element, and I think I mentioned this perhaps in my previous call, was this dreamlike quality. It moves very slowly, and I felt myself sort of being in a dream watching the film. And so sometimes in a dream there are things that happen that are just kind of bizarre, and you're left with an odd feeling, maybe a disconcerted feeling a little bit, but it doesn't necessarily make sense. I felt some of the scenes, and perhaps the one scene you mentioned with the local people outside the tavern, fit that category. It didn't advance the plot in any particular way, but it was a strange, sort of unsettling scene that worked to the overall feeling of the film, I thought. The other question I wanted to bring up is you mentioned the ending where our heroine dies. I thought that was perfect. I thought that's exactly the way it should be. In so many of the vampire films, we have the heroine, and she's bitten by the vampire once, twice, maybe 3 times, and drinks his blood and does all this sort of stuff. And yet she somehow miraculously, when the vampire is killed, she's okay again. And well, how did that happen? I have always thought that to be a major failing in a lot of films, that it just didn't make sense. Other characters in the film get bitten once and they sprout fangs. And so what the heck? What's going on here? Why is it that the good-looking female lead somehow always manages to come out okay at the end? I thought that made perfect sense, that she actually gave her life. One thing that I did think was a little bit, maybe a missed element there, or a plot point that was a little strange, was it said that the maiden needed to keep the vampire there all night. By most definitions of the term maiden, this character was not a maiden. So I thought that was maybe something they kind of missed. But overall, again, it made perfect sense to me that she actually gave her life to end the plague of Nosferatu. So that would be a place where we would have to agree to disagree, because I thought that was actually a better and more logical ending to the film.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you for Kevin for calling in and letting us know what you thought about Nosferatu. I know that Kevin's second voicemail actually was in response to some things that Beth and I said last week, so check out last week's episode if you haven't already heard our conversation about Nosferatu. I do agree with you, something I hadn't considered, but yeah, she certainly wasn't a quote-unquote maiden by the time she encountered the Count at the end of that film. You're absolutely right. I do think that that movie is so interesting in that it's generated such a weird dichotomy of responses from the monster faithful. People either really like it or just feel about it. Now, I feel like I'm more in the really like it camp, but I did have some struggles. I know that you said that sometimes the longer sequences lent the movie to feeling more dreamlike, and I can see that, and I can certainly see that in the movie we're talking about this week. The 1979 Nosferatu, it is weird, man, and we're going to get into that with Beth here shortly. But before we get to that, we do have Mark Matzek doing even more Ultraman Ace coverage with the Beta Capsule review, and I'm feeling like I want to run that right after this.
Ben Mears has been away too long. And now at last, he's come home.
My men fought at Valley Forge.
Daddy, come back safe.
Home to the childhood memories, to the old familiar faces, to a life unmolested by time.
And with your saints, let him rejoice in your presence forever. We ask it through Christ our Lord, amen.
Home to Salem's Lot, a town too good to be true.
What was that?
Did you happen to notice the time when the boys left?
We shouldn't have gone through the woods.
It's a shortcut.
They should have been here half an hour ago.
Wait! Danny, wait!
Something is happening. Something terrible.
Henry! Where's Ralphie? Ralph.
Where's your brother?
First the kid disappears, then this. You're not leaving Salem's Lot, are you?
I'm not leaving.
Don't you understand what's happening?
Do you?
Yes, I do. It's in the Marston house.
Good evening.
I dreamed. You slept there all night?
Yeah. A little tired. Didn't sleep much last night. I was dreaming. Somebody out there.
Sweet dreams.
I let him in.
Oh, it's only all just happened
Since I came here.
It wasn't a dream.
He has walked through centuries, untouched by time. He has seen empires rise and fall. He possesses the wisdom of the ages. Throughout eternity, no man has ever provoked such terrible fear and such haunting desire. Dracula, starring Frank Langella, with Laurence Olivier.
I am the last of my kind, descended from a conquering race. But I must warn you to take good care. If at any time my company does not please you, you will have only yourself to blame.
Oh, God! How's my clothes?
Dracula, the story of the greatest lover who ever lived, died, and lived again.
Sacrilege!
Dracula.
Live from the Land of Light in Nebula M78, home of the mighty Ultra Heroes, it's Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review. Ultraman Ace, Episode 23, A Game Changer. Here comes Zoffy. An old man preaching end times prophecy leads a group of children in a strange song and dance. He warps their perception of the natural world before causing them to disappear. Hokuto happens to observe them vanish, and during the investigation the old man reappears, except his head looks like a great ape, and he breathes fire. Hokuto falls off a cliff, sustaining serious injuries, but no one believes his story except for Minami. The members of TAC are forced to reconsider when reports of disappearing children come in from around the world, and the captain's own nephews go missing. Intuiting that the Yapul are behind the abductions, Hokuto agrees to be transferred to another dimension, while Minami is transported there by Zoffy, so that the two can become Ultraman Ace. But is it possible to fight a terrible monster on another plane of existence? Episode 23, which made its debut on September 8, 1972, is odd and offbeat, and in a departure from most of Ace so far, the story lacks coherence, unfolding without much logic to speak of. Why does the old man look like a monk or a prophet? Why does his real head look like a gorilla? What's with the dance he teaches the kids? Where exactly are the kids being taken, and for what purpose? The answer to all these questions would seem to be that the Yapul are evil, which is an easy out, and doesn't really connect these events enough to make internal sense. Additionally, the visual style, heavy on zooms, extreme close-ups, and dramatic lighting changes, seems meant to distract the viewer from the thin plot, but it's not enough. Plus, the idea that nearly every member of TAC would doubt Hokuto's perception of events is hard to swallow nearly halfway through the series. Wouldn't there be more trust within the team by now? I would hope so, for Hokuto's sake. While not disappointing per se, this is the least consequential episode so far, and its emphasis of style over substance is notable. For Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review, this is Mark Matzek reporting.
Good evening. Come Dracula here. Oh, bats. I can't even get a cab in this town. I'll bite Manhattan. Well, here I am in New York. The premiere of my new flick, Love at First Bite. Watch out, you peasant! I was about to say, this flick of mine is called Love at First Bite. I've made a comedy picture. Love at First Bite. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested.
You'd brush your fangs too, if this were your appetizer. And if you think that's exciting, just get a load of the main course. Is it any wonder that Dracula blows his cool?
She almost bit me. Now give me back the torch.
Get away from here! Have you no respect for the dead?
Take it easy, Boris. After all,
This is no laughing matter.
With marauders like that in his crypt, of course Dracula blows his cool. Ah! Dracula blows his cool.
Hey, Stan, what was Linda screaming about?
I always leave them screaming. The young lady was unusually delicious.
Darling, please
save those noises for the paying guests.
You give the most wonderful fang. Why, back in Transylvania, I was the only girl who ever bit it back.
If anyone has been putting the bite on you and a limp hang on your fang, you can't afford to miss Dracula Blows His Cool. Bring your own blood bank.
This is Count Dracula, and I'm here to offer you a friendly warning. Derek and his guests often get excited, and occasionally this results in revealing key plot points of the movies they're discussing. You know how the children of the night, monster kids, can get sometimes. So consider yourself warned. And don't come begging to me to kill them for their transgressions afterward. I have more pressing issues to take care of, like that pesky Van Helsing.
So it has occurred to me that I've actually never seen this film before watching it for this. I thought I had seen clips of it. Actually, at one point I thought I had seen it. And then it occurred to me, well, no, maybe not. Maybe I've only seen clips. And then we watched it yesterday, and I had never seen Nosferatu the Vampyre from 1979 until last night.
It's an interesting film, you know? It's a connected effort between French and, I assume, West German governments at that time.
79, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
And there's a lot of little things that you see in it that hinted that, despite being in English.
Kind of. According to some of the things that I've read,
yes,
there were German language takes as well.
That makes sense.
And then it was released in German as well. Now, we watched this on Amazon Prime. The only option we had was the English language option.
Right.
Apparently, Werner Herzog, the director, thinks the German language version is more true, the most artistic or poetic or whatever. But we watched it in English, and I don't think that really took anything away from it. I think the weirdness that we're going to talk about had nothing to do with whether or not it was English or German.
I agree. Yeah.
So it did star Klaus Kinski. Klaus,
probably, yeah.
Klaus Kinski, who I'm somewhat aware of. He's a very intense actor.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen him in some spaghetti westerns.
Oh, okay.
But he's one of these guys that has this reputation as being hyper bombastic and aggressive and hard to work with and hard to control.
Okay.
So much so that Herzog, who'd worked with him before, knew that the best way to get a subdued performance out of him was to basically just over-rehearse him and let him get it all out of his system.
Tire him out.
Yeah, and then kind of do what
okay.
was required for the film, according to the director and writer. Herzog also wrote this thing, so... an interesting take on Dracula.
Yes, I mean, that's right out of the gate, and this isn't really a spoiler so much as a public notice. This movie is not a remake of Nosferatu.
Except it kind of is.
It has bits and pieces.
Yeah, it's like...
And the monster is more Nosferatu than Dracula, I think.
But they call him Dracula. And then they switch some other things just randomly that is interesting to me. It's really weird. I expected a remake of Nosferatu, a 1970s bigger budget, kind of bizarre remake of the 1922 silent film, which we know is a version of Dracula, but did have its own things thrown in there as well. And I didn't see some of the things that I was looking forward to seeing in a 1970s horror film. I was expecting to see more of the occult played up, more of the spooky books and incantations and symbols and things like that you have in the original Nosferatu as well as the 2024 film.
Okay.
None of that's here. They really went down the Dracula route with that.
Yeah.
The Dracula film, and I guess novel, It's such a weird mix.
It's a weird mix.
It's bizarre. I mean, it's presented visually as a Nosferatu film.
Yes.
But then all the character names are the Dracula analog. So it's Dracula, Renfield, Harker, Mina, Van Helsing,
Lucy.
It's all of them.
Everybody's there.
But it's visually the Nosferatu mold.
Yes.
It's bizarre.
Yes, the monster is more Nosferatu and like the scenery, and there are a lot of cuts to picturesque mountainsides and lakes and forest scenery and all these views that feel more like something that belongs in a Nosferatu film than specifically a Dracula film.
And apparently he actually wanted to shoot in some of the same places the original Nosferatu was shot in.
Okay.
But for whatever reason, they weren't able to get in there, so let's go to the Netherlands.
Probably the Iron Curtain, but...
Well, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, visually it had a really interesting look, too.
Yes.
But it's weird, man. It's a bizarre film.
I did see, I was curious to see how much of a 1970s influence on like wardrobe there would be, because of course it's not set in the 1970s at all. It's set well back in time, but you did see nods to things like on the guys' coats, they had these really wide lapels that just would not have been a time period, and the color schemes were, there was a lot of orange and muted blues. There were a lot of things I would associate with 70s colors. And even in some of the actor choices, I felt like their lead female had a very Cher look to her.
Isabelle Adjani as Lucy Harker, who, I mean, gorgeous woman.
Oh, and did an entrancing job of doing it, but they so mishmashed up the plots that it made it a little hard to follow at times.
It did make it a little hard to follow, and some of the characterizations were just so out there.
Yes.
Renfield.
I know you did not like Renfield. You said this was your least favorite Renfield.
He is my least favorite Renfield. He's my least favorite Dracula or vampiric thrall that I've ever seen in any movie.
Oh, okay.
There's a lot of
Yeah, you have.
Including a lot that came out in 1979. This is like one of 5 Dracula films that came out in 79.
Okay.
And that does not include things like Salem's Lot, which also hit TV in 79, which had a vampire that looked very much like our traditional Nosferatu by design. There's another TV movie as well that was vampire-based. But yeah, there were like 5 Dracula films that came out this year. And yeah, I've seen a lot. I've seen a lot of Renfields and Equinox and everybody else. I did not like Roland Topper at all as Renfield. He did not seem to fit to me. He felt like he was in a slightly different production in terms of his portrayal, and I know the laugh is a Renfield thing, and Dwight Frye did it best in the original Dracula film.
To have a laugh is a Renfield. To have an out-of-place laugh, yes, is very Renfield, but this laugh was not only out of place in that it was happening at the wrong time and for the wrong reasons, it was the wrong kind of laugh. It's like if it was a sound effect, someone picked the wrong laugh track.
Yeah.
It should not have been so gleeful, bubbly. It didn't fit the pace of the movie.
It almost felt like he had learned his lines phonetically, and I don't know if that's true. I don't know what his background. I know he's French.
Well, okay, could have.
And granted, maybe this is where the English versus German is going to kick in here, but what we saw, it felt like he didn't necessarily believe or understand all the words he was saying.
Okay, yes, I'll give you that. Yeah.
But he's the only weak part for me. I thought the performances were solid otherwise.
Yeah. I really thought that they were. It's actually neat to get more of the lead female character, because often this can be a very male-dominated tale.
Yeah.
Vampire tales, just because we typically see the male lead vampire. Even when we have female vampires or succubi, we often see the lead is usually a male.
Yes.
Let's be honest.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of neat to see this and see their idea of how do you make vampires.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing too. So the movie, as we're going through it, we're getting bits of the original Nosferatu. We're getting bits of Dracula, both film and novel. And then at the end, it takes this hard right turn to how the vampire curse is passed on and what's happening next.
And all in the last 2 minutes.
Yeah, it completely just, what a twist.
We won't spoil that for you. You'll have to watch it yourself. And it is well worth watching. I think, especially if you are a big fan of Dracula and of Nosferatu, if you like both, you'll enjoy this. It's an interesting mix. And I think you're right that in some places the German and French influences can be seen. For example, things like they don't go to England.
Right.
They go to Wiesbaden, they go somewhere in Germany. That's actually kind of near the border. So interesting pick there that they were like, yeah, we're going to Germany, but we're going near the French border. We're going to stay, we're being diplomatic of it,
My favorite part of the whole film, though, there's no vampire involved. I liked Klaus Kinski as Nosferatu or Dracula. An interesting take.
I did too, although I think they should have kept him in the shadows more in the early part of the movie. I think they gave away the store there right off the top by having him rush into the light. And because of the choices that were made for his vampire look, more shadow early on would have been more advantageous. I had this same problem with Voyage of the Demeter.
That's right. Yeah.
That they showed the monster too soon, in full view too soon.
Yeah.
Ease me in. I want the build. I want the slow reveal of, give me just some claws sticking out, or give me just the gleam of a profile or a shadow.
Yeah.
But don't reveal the whole thing too soon, because I get tired of them by the end of the movie. I'm not scared anymore,
Well, and especially in a setup like this where the Count is being flat out creepy anyway.
Yes.
How many times, and I know you said it out loud at least once, but how many times were you thinking to yourself, if I was Harker, I would have noped out of there a long time ago?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I literally said on one of the times, I'm like, I can't believe he spent another night. What the heck? Oh, dude. Anyway,
so my favorite part, it involves Harker, who's played by Bruno Ganz. My favorite part of this whole movie is when he's on his way to Count Dracula to begin with.
Yes.
And he's at the one village stop, and he needs to find a way to get in. And he goes to the guy at the coach. I need to get on the path to Count Dracula. Well, there's no path. Can you please take me in your coach? I have no coach.
Oh, yeah.
Can I at least use one of your horses? Can't you see I have
no horses? Yeah.
But he's there grooming his horse on his carriage on the path the whole time, and the guy's just trying to have nothing to do with Harker because he doesn't want anything to do with Count Dracula. That was my favorite part of the whole movie. I thought it was funny.
I thought that was hilarious, and I guess for me it took an extra turn because my parents in the early 90s were in Romania for a month and in the Transylvanian Alps, and that's exactly how they said the people were. It was just like, if I don't want to believe it, I just pretend it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And it's not a problem.
Yeah.
And that's like a regional thing that is from long before communism or any of that. It's just how they are.
Well, I thought that was great.
I thought it was hilarious.
It was funny, but it was also so revealing about the culture and just trying to pretend Count Dracula is not even a thing. I don't want anything to do with it. So I have no horses. Yeah, that was one of my favorite bits of the whole film. And I did like Klaus Kinski's look. I agree with you. I think holding him back would have been better, but I did like that as well.
I did really enjoy, and when you watch it, you'll know which scene I'm talking about. He has a scene where he pursues another character slowly but aggressively,
and
it's so much fun. It's this like, oh, is he gonna bite him? Is he gonna and it just goes on and on and on for the longest time, and you're just held in suspense, and that's wonderful. And he does a wonderful job, I think, of honoring the original Nosferatu and the movements, but not having to be exactly like it. He is a younger vampire, and he says so. He says his biggest regret is that he can't grow old.
Yeah.
And so even though he has the Nosferatu look, he's not as old looking, not less decrepit, you know?
True.
And so it gives a vitality and an energy to the character that we don't necessarily associate with Count Dracula, I feel like. I mean, man's chuffing his own coffins blocks and blocks across the England, or the German moors or the German fields or whatever. Like, that's impressive.
Yeah.
So it's a different age of our main vampire.
It does make me want to go back to watch the original, and I probably will sometime this year. This is our last look at Nosferatu for a little while here on MKR, or The Bride of MKR.
Mm-hmm.
Just because there are other movies to get to, but I do want to go back and rewatch the original. Because I really do like that one a lot, a whole lot. But I ended up liking this one too, and I think Robert Eggers likes this as well, because I did see things in this that I don't remember from the 1922 film.
But you do remember from the newest.
That he referenced in the 2024 film. So I would not be surprised if there are some things lifted from this that he had taken inspiration from. There's not a lot of shadow work in this. There's a little bit, but not nearly as much as you have in the original or the 2024 film. That being said, this one is probably the version of Nosferatu that you can see the most stuff in, because it's not all in shadows and there aren't filters on the lenses to keep you from seeing yellows or reds or whatever.
Sure.
Like in the 2024 film. So you can actually see what the monster looks like full on. I just, again, with you, they shouldn't have done it so quickly.
Now, as you said, there's not a ton of shadow work, but one of my favorite scenes from this involves shadow work.
Okay.
In a really unique and interesting way that holds it true to what we think of as the rules for vampires. And they even say in it, there are rules for vampires. They still have to follow certain rules of physics. They're not alive, but they're still subject to, gravity can still affect them. It's in this one, and there are other things like sunlight that they have to avoid. Running water to a degree.
Yeah. Because, he goes down the river.
Well, no, he's able to, they move the coffins onto the thing. We don't know that he's put the coffins on. They've probably been lifted from the cart. I do take a slight question with him moving coffins from the ship onto land across the plank, although depending on how fast that harbor water was or wasn't moving, maybe you could make the case that that's okay. It's a little bit borderline there. But the rest of it, they do follow all the traditional rules for a vampire, including you can't see them in a mirror.
Right, which...
There's some amazing photography work that they do that I'm impressed for the 1970s, because they're clearly not CGI-ing it. So, getting the shadow in the room, which is so ominous, and yet you don't see them in the mirror, even though you're looking right into the mirror with the camera. So some really, really nice camera work and special effects work there that I'm sure took some time to work out and figure out.
Yeah, and I'm sure there was like a double for the actress, so that we see the reflection.
Yeah, right.
But it was very well done and staged incredibly well. Some of the visual effects I thought were a bit much. It's like, oh, we're in the 70s. Clearly, there's the lava lamp sky, I think is how you put it.
Yes, their lead and exit titles had some interesting things, but if you look in the sky, I'm pretty sure you can see several different faces.
Yeah, I thought so too.
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing to keep you happy while the credits roll by, because of course, being an overseas film, we're going to credit everyone at the top.
Well, the opening credits were in some catacomb somewhere, and we're seeing the mummified corpses. And these were real. I'm sure it's similar to when we have a mummy film with the luchadors. They always love to shoot Guanajuato.
Okay,
and we get the mummies of Guanajuato in there. So I'm betting that's probably what that was as well. But it's really replicated.
There's a catacombs that's under the cathedral near there that I'm sure would have been easy to shoot in, because I do think they actually shot in Wiesbaden.
I'm betting that Herzog's the kind of director who's like, oh, we can shoot there. It's cool. Let's go do that.
Yeah.
And make it make sense.
Yeah.
The slow motion bat stuff was cool, but that was all bought from a documentary. They didn't shoot that themselves, but I thought that was cool to see.
Yes.
How familiar are you with Herzog, the director?
Not very.
Do you know who he is?
No, not really.
You've seen him.
Okay.
Because he was in season 1 of The Mandalorian.
Okay. Yep.
He's the one who wants Baby Yoda for himself. And he's the one who told all the filmmakers, if you just make this puppet nothing but CGI, you're cowards.
Absolutely.
Make it a puppet. And Herzog's one of these guys who's like, yeah, he's pretty... Don't be a coward, do it right.
Well, and there's a long history in Germany of puppetry as storytelling. Long before we had any kind of movie or motion picture, for hundreds of years, puppets have been a huge part of storytelling in Germany. And not only small puppets, but large puppets as a stage feature.
Yes.
So I'm not surprised, having seen some of the floats, which have live large puppets on them. They're very old school, that someone who grew up in that era and those sorts of things were huge as kind of they reclaimed the good parts of German culture, if you will, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, that he would have grown up in that. So it makes perfect sense that he would be like, build the puppet.
And I think Neverending Story was shot in Germany. It's the first one.
I believe so, yes.
And it's got, Falco, of course, the Luck Dragon, which is just a huge animatronic.
I love Falco.
Puppet kind of thing. But Herzog has done fiction and he's done a lot of documentary.
That's where I think I know him from, is from I think it's in a nature documentary.
Yeah, and didn't
he did about Antarctica?
I think he's the one who did the documentary about the guy who thought he was friends with the bears.
Yes.
I think that is as well. Yeah.
Well, I mean, he was, for a time, friends with the bears.
I'm sure they liked playing with him.
Yeah.
Yeah, that got dark. Anyway. As far as Nosferatu goes, though, it was interesting to see. I'm not overly familiar with a lot of his fiction work, so it was interesting to see him take on a fictional story that he clearly had an affinity for. I mean, it was his call to name the characters after the Dracula names as opposed to the Nosferatu stuff.
Yes.
Apparently that was a decision that he consciously made. He's like, oh, it's in the public domain now? Awesome. You are now Harker. You are now Dracula. You are now Renfield.
And that may have been in order to tie it in with the American Dracula, because that is one thing in West Germany during that time period, very, very heavy American influence and people wanting to be more like Americans. And of course, we had troops stationed there and
I wonder too,
help do those things. So I could see, even when I went, people that I would meet that spoke no English would know the names of all kinds of American movie characters and TV characters going way, way back. I met a guy who loved The Blob. And it was like, I'm sorry, you watched The Blob? Do they have that in German? No. And he was like, in German, no. And I'm like, but you don't speak English. Correct. And you're like, I just enjoy it. And okay, you know what? Good for you. You don't even, I'm sure they have it in German now, but.
Yeah.
But, they love American stuff, so that doesn't surprise me. I do feel like we should put, and maybe in the title, you should put a trigger warning on this one. Rats.
There's a lot of rats.
When we say there's a lot of rats, I wouldn't be surprised if they had every stunt rat from the entire continent and then some. I mean, we had white rats, brown rats, black rats, gray rats, every kind of rat you'd want, and different groups of rats in different places. It wasn't the same rats over and over again, folks. So if you are like my mother and even in your 60s would race across the room and jump into a rolling chair to avoid one single rat, this is not your movie. My mom doesn't listen, so it's fine. She won't be embarrassed.
The other movie had tons of rats, though, too.
Not like this.
Well, and these weren't necessarily all stunt rats. A lot of them were acquired from like laboratories and things like that, and did not receive the most humane treatment.
That I have a problem with. But a few of them were clearly stunt rats.
Well, they brought in somebody from some animal safety group to monitor and all that, and the way the rats were being treated, he stormed off. He's like, no. Because the rats were not... In order to dye white rats gray, which they did, involves a lot of hot water that the rats did not.
I didn't know that they dyed them.
Some of them, a lot of them, yeah.
Okay, well, so trigger warning, rats and potential animal cruelty in the making of this film.
It's the 70s, and filmmaking standards were very different then.
It is pre-EU and their standards and stuff. So, yeah, it's kind of the reason, unfortunately, that sometimes studios choose even now to go make films in countries that don't have standards for things like that. Films made in like Hungary and stuff, where they don't have to follow the same rules. And I think it is up to us as moviegoers to be cognizant of that, and at least for newer movies, try to do what we can to influence studios and directors to make the right choices and make better choices in terms of animal safety, actor safety, environmental awareness, all of those things. And that's something that I think most of us as monster kids can agree with. We want to continue having movies, and so in order to do that, movies need to continue moving forward in the way that they produce themselves.
It's hard because the movies that we talk about here are older films.
And so there's some forgiveness and grace to be allowed there, but there are also important lessons for how we should make film in the future and how we should not make film.
To ignore the history is to disrespect everybody who went through it. Yes, older dinosaur movies, they would literally staple fins to lizard heads and say, boom, there's a dinosaur, shoot it. Or even some of the later Mr. Big films with shooting animals with BB guns to try to get them to move certain ways. It's hard, but I don't want to get too maudlin here. Just obviously, to think about.
It's something to think about, something to be aware as we're watching, and something to even discuss, among our fellow monster kids, and just keep an eye out in the future for opportunities to do better. We can all always do better.
There you go. So, last night, you came into the room.
I know where this is going.
So proud of yourself. You're like, I came up with a take here that, and it blew my mind.
I think it's a pretty original take. If another monster kid has also had this take, please back me up here that you came up with it a similar way to me. But I think there is a connection here to a fairy tale that nobody is recognizing, and maybe it's because I spent time.
You did.
I did time. Well, hey, when you can't speak the full language and they keep pushing alcohol at you, sometimes it is hard time. But while I was in Germany, I got to work with a theatrical group that used puppetry and that specifically worked in fairy tales, and talked about how all fairy tales from all places are connected, and they all have seed stories. There are basic stories that almost all fairy tales come from, and you just see different versions of them over and over again, and that they grow and change and modulate over time. And I think our monster movies are the same. They are fairy tales that grow and change and modulate and can have different faces and can evolve in different ways at the same time. We can have 3 different Wolfman type movies now because they can be completely different. Maybe one movie is werewolves and there's just everybody can turn into a werewolf if the moon hits them. And then we can also have the Wolfman that's coming out, which is, I think, a totally different movie.
Yeah.
And then we can also at the same time have TV shows with their werewolves or even romantic plots. I know Twilight isn't for everybody.
Well, Lego is putting out a Twilight.
But Lego is putting out the Cullen House, so I want me some werewolves. I want some Lego werewolves. I'll have to see if I can find anybody I know that works at Lego to get on that. If any of you know anyone at Lego that you could make the werewolves happen, I want werewolves. If you're going to have the vampires, you got to have the werewolves to go with them. That's all I'm saying. But yes, my take. Anyway, I think that Dracula and the Pied Piper are the same story.
The exact same?
I think they come from the exact same base story. Yeah.
Okay, so the Pied Piper stuff goes back to the 1200s.
Yeah.
Okay. But Dracula took inspiration from, whether or not you believe Bram Stoker was aware of Vlad the Impaler,
think he could have been. He's an educated fellow, and that's an interesting historical figure in the same way that I just had to read a 2,000-page book about Achilles and how he's really bad at making and keeping friends in ancient, Greece.
Okay.
It's sometimes people get weird interests. Mine was for a class I was teaching. I'm not actually that interested in Achilles, but he was interesting when I got into it. And, maybe he fell down a library rabbit hole.
Okay.
About Vlad the Impaler and was like, you know what? This would make a great monster story. I'm not sure. But even the Vlad the Impaler stories, if you look at the old Romanian tales that a lot of his stuff then came from, there's dark similarities that are just a little too hard to ignore.
Okay.
Okay, so on one side, you have Dracula, right?
Sure.
And nobody wants him to come to their town because this is always about him leaving his place of residence, whether that's in Germany or Romania or wherever he comes from.
Okay.
He comes from somewhere that's nearly abandoned or somewhere secretive and magical.
All right.
Then he comes to a town, and what comes with him? What do people often think it is when he first comes to town?
Well, isn't he normally hired to deal with these things?
I'm not, you're getting into specifics. I'm talking about the overall reach of the story. When Dracula came to town in our 1979 movie, what did he bring with him in
plague?
Stupid number?
The rats.
The rats.
Right.
I don't think the plague was actually killing anyone. That's him killing all those people.
Okay.
They just think it's the plague, but he's associated with bringing rats, right? Voluminous amounts of rats with him.
Well, especially in the 2024 and to an extent the 79 film. Yeah.
And if you look in the Romanian legends, almost all Romanians keep a cat, even if it's an outdoor cat, because rats are they're really terrified of plague and rats, and all rats are a big no-no.
All the cats that we had in Kuwait.
All the cats we had in Kuwait. It's natural pest control, if you will,
Exactly.
But there's natural pest control. Like, I've read books about, people had cats in their English castles and stuff because it's good to keep the food stores good and everything. And then there's superstition that if you don't do it, everyone's going to die immediately of some dark magical thing. There's different levels of rats are helpful to, I'm keeping cats around to keep rats away because when there are rats, there's something darker nearby.
Okay.
And I don't think the English people in their castle they were just like, rats give us the plague. Let's get rid of rats.
Okay.
It wasn't, there's something darker coming with the rats. In this, there's very obviously a darker presence.
Sure.
That the rats signify is coming. Okay, so we get rats, right? What is he there to take?
The rats.
No, he's there to take your blood.
See, that's where
Dracula's there to take your blood.
Oh, I thought you were talking about the Pied Piper.
No. And we'll get to the Pied Piper. We're still talking about Dracula.
Okay.
He's there to take your blood.
Yeah.
He's there to stop you from continuing to live.
Correct.
He's stealing your longevity or your legacy.
Okay.
Pied Piper comes to town. Guess what comes right before him?
The rats.
A whole bunch of rats that he sends into town.
He sends the rats?
You never got that? Yes, the whole thing is it's a scam. He sends the rats. He's already taught them to come to his tune, to his magical tune. He sends them in. They harass everybody. Then he comes and goes, I'll get rid of the rats for you. Look, I can make them dance away. Do-do-do-do-do. And then the rats go, and what does he take in retribution?
Yeah, because they don't pay him.
Yeah, he knows they're not going to pay him.
So he takes the kids.
He takes their bloodline.
Ah.
He takes their future. He takes their legacy. And what does he do with the children? You looked up a bunch of Pied Piper things last night after I said this. What invariably happens to the children?
They go away to a beautiful land.
Where they're never seen again. Or a dark cave where they're never seen again.
Well,
or they just disappear and they're never seen again. Yes, and your dead dog went to a nice farm upstate.
So it says through that sometime in some version of the story, once the Pied Piper is paid double or triple, the kids are returned. But maybe that's just a softening of the...
I think that might just be mostly a softening of the story.
What I found really interesting, though, is
that would not be the German version. The German version would always end with child death because that's what fairy tales do in Germany.
So what I really found interesting, though, is that one version, after you told me this, look this up, one version of the Pied Piper tale has him leading the children to the top of Koppelberg Hill.
Koppelberg.
And where is that? It's near Koppenberg Mountain, which is in...
the Transylvanian Alps. Dun, dun, dun. So I don't have to say they're the same person, but I think they're both vampires who just chose different classes. One's like either a wizard or a sorcerer. I'm not sure. I haven't looked up all of the mesmerizing type stuff yet on that. And the other one's a bard. That's obvious. That's an easy call right there. Their species is vampire. They chose different classes. They get the same thing in the end. That's what I'm saying.
Bunch of dead kids. Wow. Now I want to... Gosh, can you imagine Klaus Kinski playing the Pied Piper?
Yes. Oh, well, now I want brother to play him. The other one. I want the other one to play him. Not that played Nosferatu. I want his brother that was in Vikings to play the Pied Piper. No, the Floki one.
Okay, not the handsome one from True Blood.
No. I want Floki to play the Pied Piper.
Which one is he? He keeps saying Floki.
I think he's the third one, but not the youngest.
Okay, and isn't there it's the father also?
Yeah.
What are their last names again? Why am I drawing a blank?
Because I thought of it, so now I can't.
Yeah. Yeah, anyway.
Y'all know who we're talking about.
Yeah, that the young hot trio or so of brothers in Hollywood.
Who just seem to have it.
Yeah. Not that I'm mem.
See what I did there?
Unfortunately. Yes. Skarsgård.
Guard, thank you. The Skarsgård brothers.
I still want to see Skarsgård versus Baldwin's.
I just want all of the Skarsgårds doing like all the German fairy tales as like a series. Like each of them takes a different monster. Do they have any sisters or girl cousins that could play the female? No? There's a few witches in there that you have to account for. And
yeah. So what's your biggest takeaway from us watching these two Nosferatu films basically back to back?
I think it's that fairy tales are universal, but we all tell them in our own way.
Okay. And we're in this case
trying to have a George moment here.
So in this particular case, we're referring to the films as fairy tales because basically
they are.
It's
What are our monster stories except modern fairy tales?
Right.
Modern tellings of magic and surreal things. I would even say a lot of alien encounter films are still just fairy tales.
Yeah.
Because it's just magic coming from what we understand to be the outer limits of our place in the universe. When things had to just come from another land, that's because they didn't know anybody could come from outer space. That wasn't even an option yet. So they're all just fairy tales told through different media and told in a way that's going to be palatable to their target audiences. And I think if you look at each one like that and try to enjoy them for what they are, you'll have a great time no matter which version you watch.
I like it.
Gee, what are we going to work on next?
I don't know. I don't know how to tie the Pied Piper into...
Maybe something with fewer rats for a change.
So I know this is not the last episode of the month of January, but Beth is not going to be on the show next week. But when she does return in February, we are going to have a ferocious February. We are going to be talking about some monster movies that have a nice ferocious edge, and I can tell
very excited
that as promised, the episode that comes out around Valentine's Day, Beth will be back to talk about Godzilla Raids Again, which is the second Godzilla film. I'm excited for that one. And I'm curious to see how you feel about how they bring Godzilla back, or did they, for this one? So we saw him dissolve at the end of,
I know. Again, I look at that as different versions of this. And maybe there's just a clutch of eggs down there and they only develop one at a time.
Okay.
Well, I don't know.
We'll talk about it. Plus, a movie that I have never talked about on this or the previous iteration of this podcast, but I really enjoy it, and it's something I've always wanted to talk about.
Yeah?
Beth has agreed to talk about The Hideous Sun Demon.
Oh, yes. Looking forward to this.
In February as well. I have a few feelers out for the remaining episodes of February, so stay tuned for that. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of Bride of Monster Kid Radio. Thank you for listening, and thank you in advance, because I'm sure you're going to do it, for sharing our posts on Facebook, on X, on the various social media channels out there, for being part of the Bride of Monster Kid Radio Cyber Street team by helping us to spread the word. We are all over social media. You can check out monsterkidradio.net to find links to our Facebook page and our Facebook group and our X, and I know I keep saying it, but I really, really mean it. This week I am setting up Bride of Monster Kid Radio on Blue Sky as well. Plus, there are a few other social media outlets I'd like to get the podcast on, so stay tuned for that. We also have a Discord, a Patreon, and a Reddit. Now, I know not a lot of you are on Reddit. A lot of people on Facebook have actually told me that they already have enough social media channels that they check regularly. But if you are on Reddit, please consider joining us over on Reddit and starting some conversations over there as well. Also, the Classic Horror Film Board, we have a presence in the podcast section. I try to post the new episodes of the podcast there. So if you want to get some conversations happening with people over there on the Classic Horror Film Board, well, that's where you would want to do that. So please consider doing that. You know what else you can find on our website over at monsterkidradio.net? You're going to find our contact information. monsterkidradio@gmail.com is our email address. Or if you want to call and leave us a voicemail like Jeff or Kevin did, or you can even text us at this number. It's 360-524-2484. Of course, there's links to everything that I've talked about here on the show, as well as a link to the band that we're going to talk about here in a second, and a mention of what we're talking about next week, but I'm going to go ahead and spoil it for you. My old friend Matt Rashleigh is going to join me here on the show next week to talk about a movie that I was actually quite surprised he had never seen prior to checking it out just a couple of days ago as of this recording. 1970's Equinox.
A world-famous scientist, greatest living master of the occult, has mysteriously vanished. In his place, a huge and fearsome prehistoric monster suddenly appears. What happened to Dr. Waterman? Only one man, last to see him alive, knows. And now he finds himself in deadly peril. The weird, the unbelievable, the supernatural come alive before your very eyes in Equinox. The invisible barrier between good and evil, between light and the forces of darkness. What is the secret of the 1,000-year-old book? See 4 teenage boys and girls fight a devil cult for their lives, their sanity, their eternal souls in Equinox. In supernatural color.
I'm sure during the conversation with Matt, he and I are going to talk about how it kind of shocks me that he hadn't seen this movie before. And we're going to talk about the movie overall and get his impressions of it. I'll talk a little bit about my, not very in-depth, but I do have a little bit of a history with my fandom of that movie, and we'll talk about that next week as well. So make sure you come back for that. Stay tuned to Bride of Monster Kid Radio, wherever you download your podcasts. Bride of Monster Kid Radio is a Team Death production. All original content of Bride of Monster Kid Radio is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 Unported license. You can learn more about Team Death, our other projects like Death Designs, Mail Order Zombie, the Team Death YouTube channel, and more at www.teamdeath.com. Remember, death is spelled D-E-T-H. All previous episodes of this podcast, as well as the original Monster Kid Radio podcast, are available at www.monsterkidradio.net. Please rate and review Bride of Monster Kid Radio wherever you download your favorite podcasts. The Gothfather is copyright 2024, Jay Poisön and the Bat People. It appears on their album Planet of the Bat People, and you can find them at jpoisonandthebatpeople.bandcamp.com. Check them out. Let them know that Bride of Monster Kid Radio sent you. My name's Derek M. Cook. I'll talk to everybody next week. Ciao.